Now we have a panel on digital resilience lessons from disasters. So we've had, and I'm just going to be wrangling the Slido questions. You can put questions into Slido, as we have been doing all day. If you're online, put questions into Slido and then vote them up. I'm going to hand over to Mike Chapman, who's our chair, to introduce himself and the panel. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Paddy. Kia ora tātou. My name's Mike Chapman. I'm the Manager System Strategy and Standards at Archives New Zealand. In a previous life, I also worked for the Ministry of Civil Defence, which is why I was novel to, I think, chair this group, to keep these two honest on the panel. In joining me to talk about lessons from disasters, Simon Mason from Census Collection Operations, the DCE in Stats, and Fiona Daly, Lead Advisor, National Security System, MBIE. What we will do is go to each of the panel members and give them a few minutes to introduce themselves in a bit more depth, and also a brief overview of any emergencies they've been involved in. And I use the term emergencies there specifically, slash disasters, slash catastrophes, slash unplanned events. They all apply, and the response should be the same. And how they dealt with it.
The mic's been handed to me. Kia ora. Thanks for the introduction, Mike. In terms of MBIE, as you can imagine, it's quite a broad ministry that covers lots of different aspects in regards to events and incidents. In terms of my role, I act as a conduit between MBIE and the ODESK system in terms of when there's a nationally significant event and the system is activated. So it means a lot of herding cats and coordinating from across different business groups within MBIE to provide that one source of truth out to our chief executive and out to that broader ODESK system when it's activated. In terms of the types of events that I've been involved in, I've been in the role quite new, only a couple of years, but as you can imagine, COVID-19 was a huge coordinated response from within the ministry, and I was part of that. Also, more recently was in the National Crisis Management Centre as a liaison officer for MBIE, supporting the National Emergency Management Agency response to Cyclone Gabrielle and the Auckland floods. And the probably less visible ones that were also concurrent this year, I led the all-of-government coordination around the carbon dioxide supply shortage, which also began at the end of December last year, and have also been involved in some of the visa immigration processing responses. So that's a quick introduction on the types of events I'm involved in. I don't know if it's useful to pause and you do an introduction and we talk to each, or Mike, do you want me to talk to how MBIE's dealt with them?
Yeah, there's too many to talk about them all, which may be the plague of MBIE in its size and the issues you have. Yep. Was there a common theme?
Well, perhaps a good one to focus in on is Cyclone Gabrielle, and also that, for me, what does digital resilience look like? And again, I would like to make a big plug for business continuity planning, because it's not necessarily something I've heard a lot of visible talk of today, but again, it's about what prior arrangements have agencies got and their data centres and third-party suppliers that have planned in advance for when things go wrong, so that we don't have to respond in such a reactive way, and we have prior arrangements in place. So that, for me, is a big piece, particularly from an all-of-government business procurement perspective, that we need to focus on, and that critical prioritisation of services. For MBIE, we had quite a specific frontline role in the Gabrielle response in regards to temporary accommodation services, rapid building assessments, setting up visa categories specific to the recovery. Key thematics, as always, is the timeliness and the urgency of these things in a disaster, the challenges and opportunities around how we data share and the need to have good baseline data quality that we can access in times of urgency. Certainly that's key themes that have been carried over from COVID in terms of how we need to work on those MOUs to strengthen the links between local government and central government agencies in regards to data sharing. One that we might not think of, but is also very simple. MBIE is the fuel sector coordinating entity. In times of the cyclone, people need fuel to get their generation working, to get the digital capability back. And again, we are looking at how we can improve and have that real-time GIS system set up so that retailers and agencies can see which fuel outlets are actually open or closed, and how we can support that real practical things that people need to know when there's limitations on communications or urgency around timely information. But that's just some of the top line things that come across our desks.
Yeah, I think one interesting point there that you were involved in sort of both parts of it was the COVID-19 issue, as we all were, but that led to immigration issues. So you sort of had an event upon an event related but never ending.
Absolutely, and I think a theme that most agencies are seeing is the rise of concurrent events and the reality of that fatigue management piece with quite a lot of people working on multiple responses. So this is a plug for people who are interested in helping to get trained up in that coordinated incident management system. It's really important that we get people from who don't necessarily see themselves in that response sector to consider the skill sets that they may be able to offer into incident management and support in response time, because we certainly do need to work on that common operating picture. The data sets and the value of those are invaluable to communities and decision makers.
I'd sort of like to pick up we'll move into the census area, but with the theme that I picked up from yours around people too, and the effect, particularly as we were talking outside, the effect of Cyclone Gabrielle on the census takers. You may wish to give a broader background to it, but yeah, that resonated.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Simon Mason aho. I'm the deputy for census, that guy. Responsible for 5 million people filling in a form, either online or in person. So, is everybody familiar with the word pivot? Yeah, we pivoted a lot. Starting with COVID, we were scheduled to run some major tests to help us with census and work out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. COVID came in and locked down almost all areas that we were going to test in, and we had to pivot. And that meant we didn't get to test everything we wanted to do. So that started us off on the back foot. And it meant that some of the systems, some of those digital systems that we rely on, we didn't know if they were going to work. We didn't know to what extent that they would work. And that caused us a bit of grief in the operational period. And then February came around and storms blew in and hurricanes arrived as well. And we had to pivot again. And we had to pivot quite majorly in the east coast of New Zealand, as Fiona started to talk about, where the social good of doing a census where people should be worried about digging their houses out of all the awful sludge that they were stuck in became the focus, and burdening them with a census and another piece of paper wasn't the right thing to do. So we had to delay that by several weeks, while we also went in and got money from Cabinet to help us extend the collection period. Probably to the point where I suspect the Minister of Finance has me on a dirty black list where I'm now not allowed to ask for any money. But that cost us $30 million, that extension. And again, we had to pivot in terms of some of our operational approach when we did go back into the east coast of New Zealand. I was up there both during the period, during and slightly after the cyclone, and most recently a couple of weeks ago, where the team was telling me they had to hire horses, and they had to hire boats, and they had to hire jet skis in order to get the census out to where it needed to be. And the interesting thing about these major disasters is they almost always occur around a census. Now, I don't know if there's a correlation there. Certainly not my doing. But we have learned that we need to be responsive and reactive to the community. So when the community says don't come, we don't come. And when the community says we are now ready, then you can kind of go in. Because we want people to have somewhat of a positive experience when engaging with government. But we worked quite closely with NEMA and Civil Defence and all those other agencies that supported the community during the cyclone event to get census message out there, to get the census out there, because the census is ultimately vital to how you rebuild a community, because it's a major source of how we calculate funding in this country. So it was vital that we didn't not do it, or did it in a time that suits for the community. Now, the response rate was slightly lower for the East Coast, but we spent a lot of time trying to build rapport rather than doing something to a community. So in terms of how that manifested into digital resilience, shortly after the cyclone, we helicoptered in some of our people with StarNet to stand up local community hubs where they could not just do the census, but where they could go and communicate with the world, because the communications were extremely poor. Probably all read about it. You know, cellular reception didn't work. Radios were scarce, and people felt devoid of communication for a large period of time. So we pivoted a lot in terms of how we delivered the census during that particular event. So that's some of the story.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. I think some of the message I'm trying to get through is there was a digital resilience requirement, digital response, but it actually relied on people. It relied on the individuals. It relied on those people that had just come out of COVID, and we've all experienced COVID fatigue, sick to death of the bloody thing, and chucking a cyclone, flooding. Not sure what we booked for next week, but it's ongoing, and it comes back to public servants to respond to those things in a variety of different ways. The concept of sending in census takers to ride around on horseback actually has some appeal. Personally, it would be different from sitting in an office or, God help me, in the basement of the beehive, and I have been there before too, and that's a horrible place. So its versatility and it's building our strengths. One of the questions we'd sort of identified here was the information that you'd come out with, the disasters you responded to. Has anything changed in your systems now, and looking into the future, your operating models that have as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle, or one of the many that you've dealt with, Fiona?
So I might just just go very quickly. So Stats does a collection operations for a number of different non-census surveys. So we have field collectors out 7 days a week most of the year. So one of the things that we've had to react to is environmental events, and those once a decade storms are now coming once every 2 years, and in some places almost annually. So we're having to constantly pivot to get people to be aware of their situations before they go out into something that they're not able to cope with, because these are just becoming more and more regular events. So that's changed our operating model to be more diverse rather than centralising in particular parts of the country to draw in responses. We've become a lot more reliant in other parts of New Zealand to represent parts of New Zealand that we can't get into due to these weather events. So that's
certainly a couple of areas from MB's perspective. It's just really that the strength of that enabling local and regional business support aspect goes without saying. That's a major component about how MB enables funding through to the right routes for distribution into the communities. Specifically, there are opportunities to strengthen the mandate that organisations like LINS have. I think there's a couple of colleagues that may be in the conference in terms of that geospatial data, and having really strong prior arrangements in place for both New Zealand-based but also international-based geospatial data that becomes really important in the research and response aspect. I know there's been a couple of good wins in the budget bid in terms of improving data for the impacts around climate change and mitigation, and also that the New Zealand coastlines, and looking to the future around all the data capturing that needs to be done. As I mentioned on the ground in terms of business building assessments, getting prior arrangements in place with the local authorities so the data sharing and transfer can be smoother in times of response is certainly something MB is focused on improving as part of lessons identified from this event as well.
Sorry, Mike, can I just add to that? So I want to change my answer to what Fiona said as well. So the data is becoming really much more important, and we're finding as an agency, people are willing to suffer the quality of lower quality of data in order to get some data in order to make decisions. So that's becoming vastly more important. So our organisation usually aspires for perfection, so 90% quality of data, and we've had to lower that quality in order to get some of the information out there in order to need to make decisions. So that's becoming a shift as well.
I think also a very obvious point, but one that's worth saying from a more systematic perspective, the early warning systems. Sorry, Paddy, time to be quiet. Yeah, getting the message, hurry up. Yeah, anyways, NEMA and working with the scientists to ensure that we maximise technology and data to, that 30 seconds to 1 minute difference can actually make a fundamental difference to saving lives. So it's really exploring how we can improve and build on that capability as a country as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's how it worked out. So we have got some questions coming through on Slido, and we've got 10 minutes left, so I think it's time to go on to the questions. That's okay, Mike?
Yeah, please.
So the first one we've got here is, how do you persuade people to invest in business continuity planning? It can seem like a waste of time.
I mean, this goes back to the fundamentals across the 4 Rs in terms of risk reduction and readiness. I say from my perspective, and to I think some of the conversations that were in the riskscape discussion, the $1 spent now on mitigation versus how much $15 saved down the line. It is about both life-saving and money-saving. So to have those robust plans in place is going to help with a whole lot less pain down the line. It does concern me from an all-of government perspective. We don't have that clear critical prioritisation around when Wellington goes down, what's the top 5 services that need to be delivered to maintain payment systems, Datacom, who's prioritised, etc. So whilst it may sound a bit boring, it is fundamentally important for when these big catastrophic events will come along and be on such a bigger scale than what we have just unfortunately been through.
I think also it's been seen as very time-consuming, and the effort for return. It shouldn't take much time at all now. We've had plenty of practice over the past 3 or 4 years in business continuity. It should be dead easy to sit down one afternoon and bash out a continuity plan with the experience we've all achieved. I've got my tongue in my cheek when I say that, but it should be easier.
I've got nothing here to add.
Sorry. So next question is, how do you stop people going into hero mode during a disaster and burning themselves out?
Build more heroes. It's actually a really good question because it does happen, unfortunately, all too often where you rely and build on single points of dependency in these types of events. Usually it's the first person to pick up the mantle and kind of lead on, and those people kind of get tired very quickly. During the cyclone, we had a regimented process where we made people take leave and return to their places of their usual places of residence outside the situation, so they could take leave because they were actually no good to anybody if they burnt themselves out, least of all themselves. So that's just one of the things that we looked at.
Yeah, certainly from a MB perspective, we're really focused on that breadthening the bench and that capability and capacity building. Maybe the least likely people that might actually really enjoy getting into coordinated incident management and targeting them for the specific functions. But I think it's really important that welfare and wellness management, and I say people are at the heart of any response, so it has to be really integrated into the check-ins and the people-centred focus to make sure that people can't get into that situation where they're 24/7 for 12 weeks of response.
So we've got another question. We've got lots of questions here, but the top-rated one at the moment is, what is Stats NZ's thinking on how to digitally transform to be resilient in the face of these disasters?
So at the moment, a lot of our input comes from face-to-face, certainly for social outputs that we produce. We're actually embarking on a transformation where we will shift to more administrative sources of data. So what that means for us is that we need to help government agencies build their administrative sources into statistical sources, which means the quality fundamentally may need to change. And that might take years for some of those sources of information, and some of those sources of information may need to be created. Again, that may take years. So we are actually already thinking about how do we transform ourselves over a multi-year period to get to a more resilient status where we're not relying on more human face-to-face contact, which is not only waning on the public who don't want to answer their doors anymore, and they don't want to see somebody come and knock on their door and ask them a whole bunch of questions and take 2 hours in their home, which is what happens at the moment. So.
Okay, so there's a comment. This isn't really a question, but a comment, and you might want to respond to it, or you might not. True digital resilience would mean it wouldn't cost millions to pivot. No, I didn't write that.
I can't put a cost to. Does it take millions? I don't know. In terms of our experience, it has taken millions to extend the census because it's such a large-scale activity. It's the largest peacetime activity that we do in this nation. So it costs a lot of money in the way that we do it. What we need to do is change the way that we do it, and that's one thing that we're going to talk to the public of New Zealand over between now and maybe next year around what does future censuses and those sorts of things look like, and hopefully lower that cost. No, nobody's going to tell anybody, are they?
Apart from it's recorded. No. In terms of that digital resilience, I think a quick shout out to the telecoms sector. There's obviously a lot of great work going on in that opportunity for users to access more in the future. I'll not name companies, but in terms of the ability to have New Zealand-wide connectivity is going to be great in the future. Also, again, plug that critical dependency piece. An isolated resilience strategy is only ever going to be as good as your critical national infrastructure resilience and or your disaster risk resiliency. So, less silos, more collaboration is always going to be a good thing to save money.
Agreed. But what resilience do we have to a solar flare?
So we've got a few more questions. We've got a few more questions in Slido, but is there anybody in the audience with a burning question that they can't be bothered typing in? No? Okay. I'll ask one of the... So what frameworks... I think we've already covered this, but the question is what frameworks do you use to manage disaster response? How do you keep on top of everything? And I think this is the SIMS framework we were talking about.
Appreciate. I'm trying not to have an acronym central day, but so somebody's thank you for those that have commented in the frame. Yeah, the SIMS structure is a multi-agency wide recognised approach to coordinated incident management in New Zealand. There will be a review in 4th edition next year, but for now, the 3rd edition is it, and the whole idea it's scalable. It's agile, it can be adapted for your needs, and I do truly believe that, and it's been very useful for us.
I think it actually, it's the core response to anything, effectively, right, from road smash to major earthquake, and it works.
The last question we have is there value in having the head offices of government departments distributed over regional offices? What might this look like?
Again, this comes back to good business continuity and broader that piece about flexibility by default and to build resiliency by not having all your IP, as in your intellectual people and property, in one place. So I think it should be something that all agencies are considering in terms of the distribution of people, brain power, and assets. As to say, that's going to be fundamental when, unfortunately, we have a major catastrophe and we need the default arrangement from Auckland to stand up. So the more people that actually work outside of Wellington now, the better.
Okay, I think that's... Am I on microphone again? Yes. So that's all we have time for. It's time for our afternoon tea. I'd just like to thank Mike and Simon and Fiona for that discussion. I think that was really interesting, and we have got some small gifts for you, which I'll give to you in a minute. And if you can all express your appreciation in the usual way.